What is something from the Stoics that everyone should learn right now to help them have more courage and live a greater life? If there were 3 things that everyone could take away from the Stoics to improve the quality of their life right now, first, what would that be?
I got some good ones. So one of the questions we ask ourselves when we're like afraid of something, when we're thinking about, we go, but what about me? Like, what would I do if, right? Like we're worried. And Marcus Aurelius goes, you'll meet that with the same weapons you've met all your other problems. Mm-hmm. So remembering that like, hey, you've been scared before and you're still here, right? So we often what our fear is really doing is underestimating or undercounting how good we actually are at what we do. Like you're not suddenly tomorrow going to be a helpless loser. You're the same person you are today. Mm-hmm. And what will you do? You'll figure it out. Just like if you quit your job, you'd be like, I'm quitting and I'm going to go find a new job. Mm-hmm. But if you got fired, that suddenly feels like disempowered, whereas the other one feels very empowered. So remembering what you're capable of, to me, is really important.
Okay, that's one.
Number 2, the Stoics say that we should always be training. So one of the reasons I think it's important to have like a physical practice, one of the reasons it's good to seek out adversity and difficulty is so when stuff happens, you're ready. Epictetus, one of the early Stoics, he's actually a slave, and he says, like, you want to get to a point where when stuff happens, you're able to say, like, this is what I trained for.
Right.
Like, you knew this could happen, and you did the work.
Yes. Before you go into the next one, it's right when the pandemic happened, I was like, this sucks, and yet I've been training for this for the last, like, 12, 13 years of my life.
Yes.
Because in 2008... in 2007, I got injured and had surgery. And then 2008, the housing crisis, and there were no jobs for someone like me without a college degree that was ignorant from school. I was like, I better develop myself so that when this happens again in 5, 10, 20 years, I'm ready to take on any adversity.
Yeah.
Maybe it's not fun and it's still challenging, but I'm prepared and ready. And I spent 13 years training for that moment. And I felt a sense of, kind of weirdly, I felt a sense of peace that gave me the energy and the clarity to take action and shift where I needed to and lead from a place of courage as opposed to, and I wasn't perfect, but lead from a more calm, peaceful place as opposed to, frantic, fearful place.
Well, look, preparation makes you brave, right? You prepared, so you were ready. And then I think also, because you remembered what you felt then, you were also in a position to lead and understand what people who were not as prepared needed to hear.
Yeah, what they're experiencing. It sucks.
Yeah.
So you can have empathy like you talked about, you can connect with people in that way. Okay, so always be training, always be learning something new, training yourself physically, mentally, emotionally.
And the third one would be this Stoic exercise of memento mori, which basically means remember you will die. I actually carry a coin in my pocket that says this. But I think when you realize, like, hey, life is already short and fragile, like, I don't need to, if I'm spending my time cowering in fear or worrying, I'm acting as if I have a certain power over things that I don't. There's this famous Stoic story where, like, the emperor sees this Stoic philosopher he hates, and he's like, I'm threatening you to, or I'm sentencing you to death. And he's like, I was already sentenced to death.
At some point.
Yeah. He's like, you have no more power over me than I had, than life itself
than Mother
has.
Nature. Just me dying.
And so realizing that life is fragile. I think sometimes people can miss this. Like, memento mori doesn't mean like, don't wear a motorcycle helmet or pretend the pandemic is not real. That's not what it's saying. But it's saying, like, hey, focus on the parts of safety and concern that are in your control. But if you're wasting your time being afraid, that's something I thought a lot about in the pandemic. It's like, look, I don't know, especially early on, we don't know where this is going, don't know what it means, don't know what is ticking clock is in anyone's body, right? What pre-existing condition you might have or bad piece of luck you got. So you take it seriously, but within that, what are you doing with your time, right? Like, what are you going to spend your time on? Mm-hmm. So if you're spending that time worrying, stressing,
watching the news all day,
what you're actually doing is rejecting the life that you have in front of you in this moment.
It's kind of like a longer eclipse. It's
Yes.
like there's an eclipse that's happening. We don't know what this is, but you could sit there and worry and fear for those 5 minutes of the eclipse or whatever, or you can look up and enjoy it and do something with your time and
Exactly.
make the most of this and prepare and strategize and organize your time.
Yeah, James Stockdale, who spends 7 years in a prison camp in Vietnam, who reads the Stoics, he says, he gets there and he goes, I never lost sight of the fact that I controlled the end of the story, right? So if he got out, that he would control the end, he would decide what, he said, and that I could turn this into something that in retrospect I would not have traded for. And
Isn't that crazy?
that's incredible.
It's like Mandela as well. It's like,
Yeah.
25 years or something?
So I think it takes courage to say,
Man.
this thing happened to me and I wouldn't have chosen it. I didn't want it. But now that it's here, I'm going to face it. I'm going to apply all my training and experience towards it. And then I'm not going to waste my life being bitter, resentful, afraid, passive about it. And I'm just going to get to work turning it into something.
Yeah. I'm not sure if this is 100% true or accurate, but I heard someone say that Bhutan is like the happiest country.
Really?
I'm not sure if you've heard of this. It's because, I don't know if everyone does this or just some people do this there, they focus on their death 5 times a day.
Interesting.
They think about their death 5 times a day. And so there's an app, I think it's called Croaked,
Yes,
or
I've
you
seen
will,
this.
or you will croak, or you
Yeah.
will, something like that, where 5 times a day, I had it for a while, it sends you a reminder you're gonna die
Yeah.
with an inspiring quote that has you reflect on your death 5 times a day to remind yourself. Do you have this on your phone?
No. Did I give you one of these? This is what I
coin?
carry in my pocket. Yeah.
Let me see. Oh, nice.
You should just carry that. It's
Okay.
like a nice weight. So I spin it, and the idea is,
you could leave life right now.
and the rest of that quote. So Mark Stewart says, "You could leave life right now," and then he says, "Let that determine what you do and say and think." And so to me, the power of meditating on your death is that it puts everything in perspective, right? It doesn't make things meaningless. It actually makes them meaningful because it says like, if this doesn't matter, I shouldn't be doing it. And if it does matter, I should be doing it as if it is the last time that you get to do it.
Right.
Like, I think one of the things, I don't know about you, but like as like an ambitious or driven person, I find myself like rushing a lot, right? Like gotta go here, gotta go there. This is taking too long. I don't want to wait. I even found myself like my son, he often like naps in the car. So it's like, you're in the car as long as he's asleep. And I'll find myself like, you're behind a slow driver and you're like, I got to get around this. And then I'm like, but I'm not going anywhere, right? Like I'm rushing. And so what I've started to remind myself is like, what are you rushing towards? You're rushing towards death, right? Not just because speeding is unsafe, but you're rushing towards, like as you're rushing out of a moment, you're rushing away from life. Seneca talks about, he says, don't think of death as happening in the future. Think of death as happening right now.
Really? Why?
And the time says because the time that passes belongs to death, right? Like so when you die, you're like you've lived 80 years, but
Yes.
you've also that's 80 dead years that can never come back. So if you think about the time that passing as being death happening, like every minute you're getting closer to death. You don't want to rush through a moment. You want to fully experience the moment.
Even if you're waiting in line or behind a car or impatient.
This is life. And when you're rushing away from it, or you're rushing toward death. And so you slow down and you go, okay, I've been alive 34 years.
Right.
What do I have to, was I alive for 34 years?
Or was I rushing?
Right. Or was I rushing away to get to 35? But maybe I die at 35, right? You don't know. So if you just go like, the present is here, I'm going to be controlled enough and courageous enough to just, this is enough, this is it, doesn't need to be anything or anywhere else. I'm just going to be here and I'm not going to rush away. And kids have really been helpful for this because you're like, oh, not only am I rushing potentially like towards death, but at the very least, they will never be this age again. So as you're trying to get this over with, you have to
You miss
intellectually
those years.
Yeah, and eventually you'll be like, oh, if only they were 5 again, right? Like, but when they were 5, you wanted it to be over, and so
the screaming, the crying, the pooping, or whatever it is. It's like, oh, I wish they could do this on their own, but you look back and
you don't really want that.
Yeah.
So
you want them to stay there forever. You're like, I want to capture this moment.
Yeah, and this is true even for the shitty stuff. Like even when you're stuck in traffic, even when you're home with the flu, even when like.
So true. It's like, I don't know if you think about this. I mean, you've always just been like talented and successful your entire life, unlike me, where I struggled and went through pain for years. But I feel like, especially the years after my dream was over playing football, and I was like, well, who am I? What is my identity? What is the value I add to the world if this was my value? How can I, just survive and thrive in this world without that value or identity anymore? I remember just being in a state of uncertainty for a while and wanting to get out of it, wanting to have a job, wanting to launch a business, wanting to have money, wanting to have an audience, wanting to have a book, all these different things, wanting to have something. Yeah. And when I look back and I'm like, man, those moments were really meaningful of what I was living and learning moment and day by day. The struggle, the pain, the adversity. Like, I'm recreating that in other ways just by trying to get to the next level, but I'll never live that aspect, those moments again, the specific time.
Well, and when you got those things, was it as magical as you thought it would be? It never is.
It wasn't. It wasn't as fulfilling. It was cool to see like a full circle and reflect back, but it was never like, oh, I've made it.
You never feel like you've made it, and so that like, I talk about this a little bit in some of my stuff where like, what will happen is you get to the medal stand, right? You New York Times bestseller, Olympic gold medal, All-American, whatever the thing is, right? And there's an anticlimacticness to it.
Very. After 10 minutes, you're like, now what?
You talk about this in the School of Greatness. Yes. You're like, now what? So the problem is people can learn, you can go 2 ways. You feel the now what. So you can go, now, I got to find something really meaningful.
I got to go bigger.
Well, no. So you either look at that and you're like, oh, it was never about accomplishments. It was always about being present and meaning and connection and the friends you made along the way.
Right.
Or you go, oh, it's that I have to do it again. Or, oh, it wasn't $1 million, it was $1 billion.
Yeah.
And so you can see why that moving of the goalposts creates really successful people. But they are rarely happy people.
Happy or fulfilled.
Yes.
Or peaceful inside.
Yes. And I think it's the journey I'm on, what I'm trying to do, I would like to be proof that it is possible to be world class at what you do and come from a place of contentment and fullness, not being like, I just need this, then I will be good. Because you're never, ever good.
There's always going to be some writer better than you, or someone that writes a book in a way that's different than you, or whatever. There's going to be someone more talented, more successful,
I remember
richer.
Of course. I mean, you meet someone. There's a story about Joseph Heller and Kurt Vonnegut. Kurt Vonnegut wrote Slaughterhouse-Five. Joseph Heller wrote Catch-22. 2 of the great writers of the 20th century. And they're at this party, and you've been at parties like this, where like you're at a much richer person, right? Like one of those, you're like, why am I even here? And Kurt Vonnegut is teasing Joseph Heller, and he says, like, this guy made more money this week than your book will make in its entire life.
Right.
And he says, yeah, but I have something he doesn't have.
What's
and
that?
He's like, what could that possibly be? And he says, I have enough.
Ooh.
And it's not that guy just wrote Catch-22 and then he sat on his ass. He wrote other great stuff. He did great work. He just wasn't coming at it from a place of craving. Like, we had that word thirst. Like, he wasn't thirsty. He was quenched, but he was doing it because he actually liked it. I remember the first time one of my books hit #1, I was mowing the lawn at my house. And my agent, Steve, called me, and I was like, now I have to finish mowing this lawn. It was like,
okay, I had a 10-minute moment, and I'm still here, like, pushing this thing.
And then you realize, like, oh, it's never going to be, I don't know what I thought it was going to be, but I didn't think it was going to be that. And I feel grateful that I didn't think, oh, I have to have back-to-back #1s. That will be it,
It's interesting. I remember Steve, when Steve called me, because we were the same agent, and when I didn't hit number one, but I hit the New York Times bestseller list. And I remember for like an hour just being like, wow, this is something I dreamed about. But then after an hour, like calling everyone and being like, congratulations, I was like, did anything change? Like nothing really changed. I accomplished a thing. Yeah, there wasn't like opening up the gates and money dropping down or people calling me. It's like a few people noticed and a few, okay, you do one post on Instagram and then people compliment and then people move on.
Well, so on
time moves on, it's.
On this book, I'm actually thinking about that because when you do a book, there's this whole lane of prioritization of like, how do you get on the list?
Yes.
And it takes a lot of your time and energy.
Man.
And why do you do it? It's obviously there's some business reasons, but part of it is, if not ego, it's this like, people said that's important. So you're like, that's as good a target as any. On this one, and I'm a little bit of a thing with my publisher where I'm like, no, I just want to like get as many books in people's hands as possible. So I'm like ignoring all that. But there's a kind of a fear there because it's like, the one benefit of that strategy is that the success is clear and objective and recognizable by other people.
Yes.
So like the book's going to come out. I know it's doing well. I already know the track that it's on. But like, I'm not saying I'm going to get condolences, but there are people who are going to be like, oh, I guess it didn't work as well. Like, so
it's kind of been like all your books. They like didn't hit right away. It's like 2 years later. Now it's number one. And it's crushing.
Just the idea of like, hey, you have to determine what success is to you and to not base it on what other people like.
That's so hard. That's courage.
It's hard to do that.
I tell you what, for me, the last 2 years, I've been working on developing a new book, but I've also been like, gosh, do I do the traditional publisher thing? And I've been having these conversations, but I'm like, I just want to let that go and just write a good book that people are impacted by.
Right.
But it's like, oh, do you worry about the advance and what people are going to ask you about it, or do you not care about that at all?
Yeah.
Self-publish it and just try to help as many people as possible. Is there a balance? And literally, it has been holding me back until in the last like 6 weeks. For the last couple of years, I've been in this limbo. I think one, because I've been trying to like build my business in the pandemic and shifting, but this has been on my mind, this conversation for 2 years during all this. And it's not until now where I'm just like, okay, I need to get clear and I just need to take action and do it from the highest level place possible. Do things that are smart as well for business, but also just do what's going to help as many people.
What's a safety net, right? Yeah. To do it, to do the conventional, like this is how it's done, is safer. Because like then no one's going to be like, what an idiot.
Right.
Or like,
oh, he's falling off the wagon.
Yeah, or he's a loser, it didn't work. He's on the decline.
Yeah.
And so the decision to like do stuff that you care about, that requires sort of like burning the boats behind you and just going like, I'm on this journey. And I think it's particularly hard in today's world where, there's view counts and likes. Like there's so much more public quantification of what's done. And like when I talk to sports teams, I sometimes say that I'm a little bit jealous. So it's like, it's obvious whether they're doing a good job or not.
You're jealous?
I love the clarity of sports. Like lose.
Win, loss,
how
track
many points,
and field, yes.
Stats.
Did you get the height or not? Yes.
But the reality is, in the world that the rest of us exist in,
it's like a committee and how many people like it and who you're following.
Running your own race. Yeah. Like you have to decide what success is.
I know.
And that means criticizing yourself when you fall short of your own metrics. And it also means congratulating yourself on a success that perhaps other people don't recognize.
Right. The success could be just, I'm proud of this chapter I wrote in this week or this month, even though no one's going to see it.
Yeah.
No one's like buying this, but I'm proud of the work that I'm putting in, the effort, the energy, the process.
I've tried to get to, I would say that on my first book, I was 10%, this is a success because I made it and it was the best I was capable of, and 90%, let's see what the results are. Like, let's see how it does. And I would like to think that as I've gone forward, that's slowly flipped and that I'm now 90, it's already a success because it exists.
Even if no one buys this,
it's my best work.
Yeah.
And then 10% like bonus, like, hey, it worked, won awards, got recognition.
But isn't it the, like we talked about in the beginning, there's kind of like 3 levels to like a book. There's the mastery of writing the book, which you've become one of the greatest writers of our time, in distilling wisdom, ancient wisdom, and creating practical examples on how you can actually do this for today's life. And millions of people have read your books. But you could master writing the book, but you also have to master doing the marketing and promotion and putting yourself out there and communicating it. And then master being patient. Of like, maybe you put out the great book and no one cared about it right now for a few years, but then you be patient and people start buying it.
Well, I think you want to rank them. So the Stoics say that their first task in life, the most important task in life, is what is up to me and what is not up to me. Like separating things into the category of, is it in my control? Is it not in my control? So as I look at like any project or business or whatever, I prioritize based on like what's most in my control to what's least in my control. So like the first mastery of the thing itself, like is it the best album, the best video, the best, live event it could possibly be? You have as much control over that as you're going to have of anything, because that's yours. So like there you have the ability to get most of the win before it's even out. Then marketing and promotion and communicating and talking about it, that's like more something you have influence over as opposed to something you control, right? Because it's like what's happening in the world, like how on point or trend is your thing,
right.
But it's also, are you willing to put in the time? Are you willing to, so many people just think they're better than that. And so they don't do it. And then the third part is the patience or the time. Or it's like, you gotta, the audience will like it. You imagine you're Herman Melville, you write Moby Dick, it gets savaged. Everyone's like, this is not just not good. This is
horrible.
Horrible. You should be, we're offended that you did it. And then only like towards the end of your life and after your life, does it finally get the recognition you deserve? So that part's the least in your control. And you have to be somewhat detached from that.
Right.
Because if you wake up every day and you're like, is this the day that people finally recognize me for all my contributions? You have handed your happiness over to something that's not up to you.
It's true. It's funny as you were saying that. I grew up in a religion called Christian Science that a woman discovered this religion and wrote a book called Science and Health.
Yeah.
And this is the same time back in the late 1800s when Mark Twain was around. And they were kind of like frenemies, I guess. And Mark Twain wrote an entire book trashing this woman, Mary Baker Eddy, and her findings of, the science behind healing. It was essentially like the science of Jesus' healing.
Okay.
Here's how it works. Here's how the mind works and how we can heal ourselves. And he wrote an entire book bashing her and the religion called Christian Science, which was like this critical of her work because she kept writing the same book with expanded updates every year, like so many different editions of the same book.
Yeah.
And it kept hitting number one. And he had to write new books all the time. Right. So I think he was just frustrated that this woman kept writing the same book over and over with like, here's more finding and research and science of how the mind and body is healed through the mind. And it's funny, like, she just kept going because she was focused on the work and healing people one at a time, and the message spread. But I think it's interesting that, for a reason that came up for me, because the more you put your work out there, the more criticized it's going to be open to. There's more people are going to be willing to criticize it. And I think a lot of people aren't ready for criticism. They're not trained to deal. No one teaches you how to deal with criticism when you have an audience.
No one teaches, because it's a champagne problem that a lot of people never get to.
Yes.
So there's not like a lot of instructions, but it is inevitable. And like, you have to realize, I've realized a couple things. One is like, critics are almost always louder than your fans. Like people who dislike something are much louder than the people who are like,
why is
that's
that?
Pretty good.
Why is that?
I think it's one feels more strongly than the other. Like the stuff I like, I'm like, cool. Right?
Yeah.
But then when you really hate something, you're like, I need them to suffer how I am suffering. So a lot of times I think you're just different levels of enthusiasm. Even if 10% of the people hated it and 90% of the people liked it, you're going to hear more from the 10%.
Yes.
Where I get frustrated with people on manifestation or the law of attraction is this idea of like, write yourself a check for $1 million and it will be
wait.
true.
Yeah.
Right. Wait. No. Go do the work.